The desert storm raged as armed men surrounded the ranch, their rifles gleaming in lightning flashes. Ronan Mercer stood between them and the black stallion that had become his only reason to live. Behind him, the horse screamed, a sound of pure defiance that split the night. The lead developer raised his weapon, rain streaming down his face. "You'll disappear, just like the last guy," he shouted over the thunder. Ronan's hand tightened on the old rifle he'd found in the abandoned house. He had nothing left to lose, nothing except this. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this reaches. The Greyhound bus coughed black smoke as it pulled away from the gas station, leaving Ronan Mercer standing in a cloud of diesel fumes and regret. Caldera Springs, Arizona, wasn't on any map that mattered. Population 287, according to a sun-bleached sign that looked older than half the buildings downtown. The main street consisted of a hardware store with bars on the windows, a diner with a broken neon sign, and 3 abandoned storefronts that hadn't seen customers since the copper mine closed in '98. Ronan shifted his duffel bag, everything he owned fit inside it, and started walking. The late afternoon sun hammered down on cracked asphalt that shimmered with heat. His left leg ached where the titanium rod had replaced bone. It always ached. That was the deal he'd made with the universe the night his Harley lost an argument with a semi-truck outside Flagstaff. He'd woken up 3 weeks later in a Phoenix hospital with a shattered pelvis, a ruined leg, and the knowledge that the woman riding behind him hadn't woken up at all. Jessica. Her name had been Jessica, though sometimes in the fog of the first few months, he'd struggled to remember even that. The guilt had been cleaner than the pain, sharper than any of the surgeries. It still was. "You looking lost, son?" The voice came from the diner's doorway. An old man in a grease-stained apron stood there, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably been white sometime during the Carter administration. His face was weathered leather, eyes sharp despite the cataracts forming at the edges. "Just passing through?" Ronan said. The lie came easy now. He'd been just passing through for 2 years. "Uh-huh." The old man spat into the dirt. "Bus don't stop here unless someone asks it to. You asked it to." Ronan didn't respond. He'd learned that silence made people uncomfortable enough to fill it themselves. "Name's Earl, run the diner, also run the only motel, the only bar, and the only gas pump that works within 40 miles. He paused. "You got money?" "Some." "How much is some?" Ronan pulled out his wallet. Inside were a $10 bill, a maxed out credit card he'd stopped trying to use 6 months ago, and a photo of his sister Celine that he couldn't bring himself to throw away even though she'd stopped taking his calls after the accident. Enough for coffee. Earl studied him for a long moment. "Coffee's $2, but information might cost you more." "I'm not buying information." "You will." Earl stepped aside, gesturing toward the diner's interior. "Come on, you look like you're about to collapse, and I don't need that kind of liability." The diner was exactly what Ronan expected. Torn vinyl booths, a counter with stools that didn't match, and a ceiling fan that wobbled dangerously with each rotation. The only other customer was a woman in her 60s, hunched over a crossword puzzle and a cup of something that had probably been coffee hours ago. Earl poured fresh coffee without asking, set it down in front of Ronan with a heavy ceramic mug that had a chip in the rim. "You running from the law?" "No." "Debt collectors?" "No." "Woman?" Ronan took a drink. The coffee tasted like it had been filtered through old socks, but it was hot. "That's none of your business." "Fair enough." Earl leaned against the counter. "But if you're looking for a place where people don't ask questions, you found it. Caldera Springs got 2 types of folks. The ones who've been here so long they forgot there's anywhere else, and the ones hiding from something they can't outrun. You strike me as the second type." "I'm just tired." "Yeah." Earl's expression softened slightly. I can see that. The woman with the crossword puzzle looked up. Her voice came out raspy, like she smoked 2 packs a day. He's here about the ranch. Ronan frowned. I don't know anything about a ranch. Vesper's old place, the woman continued, ignoring him. Been sitting empty 8 months now, ever since Eli disappeared. Disappeared? Ronan asked, despite himself. Earl shot the woman a warning look, but she waved him off. Elias Vesper owned a ranch about 12 miles north of here, up in the basin, kept to himself mostly, but he was always going on about the wild horses, about developers, trying to clear them out. Then one day, he just vanished. Truck was still parked at the ranch. Door was wide open, coffee still warm on the table. Sheriff said he probably wandered off and got lost in the desert, but nobody believes that, Earl finished quietly. Ronan took another sip of coffee. Why not? Because Eli knew that desert better than anyone. Spent 40 years out there. He wouldn't have gotten lost. The woman went back to her crossword. And because the county sold his ranch 3 weeks ago for back taxes, pennies on the dollar, to some development company that's been buying up everything they can get their hands on. That's enough, Martha, Earl said. But Martha wasn't done. Except the sale fell through last week, something about the title, so now it's just sitting there, empty, waiting. Ronan set his mug down. Waiting for what? Someone desperate enough or stupid enough to claim it. Martha looked up at him directly. Which one are you? The question sat between them like a third presence. Ronan thought about the $10 in his wallet. He thought about the bus depot 200 miles back, where he'd slept on a bench because he couldn't afford the motel. He thought about the way his sister had sounded on the phone 3 months ago, the last time he'd tried calling, tired and disappointed and done with his excuses. How much would something like that cost? He heard himself ask. Earl's eyebrows went up. You serious? How much? Well, if you're talking about the back taxes, property fees, administrative costs, Earl did some mental math. Probably around $800-900. Ronan's heart sank. He'd been stupid to even ask. But Martha was smiling. Unless you know someone on the county assessor's board who's tired of dealing with paperwork for a property nobody wants, someone who might be willing to settle the whole mess for whatever cash you got in your pocket right now. You know someone like that? Ronan asked carefully. I am someone like that. Martha stood up, gathering her crossword puzzle. I'll be at the county office for another hour. You want that ranch? You bring me whatever you can afford. I'll make it work. She walked out, leaving Earl and Ronan staring at each other. She's serious, Earl said. Martha's been trying to clear that property off the books for months. County doesn't want it, state doesn't want it, and after what happened to Eli, locals sure as hell don't want it. What did happen to him? Earl refilled Ronan's coffee without charging him. Official story is he wandered off. Unofficial story, he paused. Eli was poking around in things that made powerful people nervous. He had evidence of illegal horse captures, bribes, all sorts of nasty business tied to that development company. He was going to the feds with it. Then he disappeared. And nobody investigated? Sheriff looked around for a week, didn't find anything, declared it an accident, case closed. Earl's voice went hard. Sheriff's brother-in-law works for that same development company. If you're wondering about coincidences, Ronan looked down at his coffee. He'd spent 2 years running from his own past, telling himself he was looking for a place to disappear. Maybe he'd just found it. Or maybe he'd found something else entirely. The ranch, he said. It's really that bad? Depends on what you consider bad. Buildings half collapsed, wells probably dry, and there's no electricity for the last 6 miles of roads. Plus, there's the horse. The horse? Earl nodded slowly. Big black stallion, wild as they come. He showed up about a year before Eli disappeared, and Eli spent months trying to gentle him. Never could. After Eli vanished, that horse stuck around anyway, like he's guarding something. Locals won't go near the place anymore. They say the horse is cursed. Cursed, Ronan repeated flatly. I'm just telling you what people say. You seem like a man who makes his own judgments. Earl pulled out a scrap of paper and drew a rough map. Road north out of town, take the second unmarked turn after the abandoned gas station. Follow it 12 miles. You'll know it when you see it. Ronan studied the map. Why are you helping me? Because you got the look of a man who needs a reason to stay somewhere. And because Eli was my friend, and I'd like to think someone's going to finish what he started, even if they don't know they're doing it yet. Earl slid the paper across the counter, but mostly because I'm old and bored, and I want to see what happens next. 20 minutes later, Ronan walked into the county assessor's office, a double-wide trailer behind the hardware store, and found Martha behind a desk buried in file folders. Didn't think you'd show, she said. He pulled out his wallet and set the $10 bill on her desk. This is everything I have. Martha picked up the bill, held it up to the light like she was checking for counterfeits, then opened a drawer and pulled out a form already filled out except for the signature line. Sign here. Ranch is yours. That's it? That's it? County's happy to be rid of it, I'm happy to close the file, and you're happy to have a roof over your head. Everybody wins. Ronan signed his name, his hand shaking slightly. He hadn't owned anything in 2 years. Now he owned a ranch he'd never seen, bought with his last $10. Martha stamped the form 3 times with unnecessary force. Congratulations. You're now the proud owner of 40 acres of scrubland and a death trap that'll probably collapse on you in the first strong wind. You really know how to sell a place. I'm not selling. You already bought it. She filed the form in a cabinet. Now get out of my office before I change my mind and remember all the legal reasons this is a terrible idea. The sun was setting by the time Ronan found someone willing to drive him out to the ranch. A kid named Tyler, maybe 19, with a beat-up Ford pickup and nothing better to do. He charged Ronan the coffee money Earl had refused to take. You sure about this? Tyler asked as they turned off the main road onto a dirt track that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Nobody goes out here anymore. Why not? Because it's cursed, man. Everybody knows that. Buy a horse. Don't laugh. My cousin saw it once, said it was the size of a truck, and had eyes like something from hell. Ronan didn't bother responding. He watched the desert roll past. Endless scrub brush, scattered rocks, the occasional dead tree, twisted by wind. The sun painted everything orange and gold, beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. The ranch appeared suddenly as they crested a low rise. Tyler stopped the truck, unwilling to go farther. This is as far as I go, man. You're on your own from here. Ronan grabbed his duffel and climbed out. Thanks for the ride. Tyler was already turning the truck around. Good luck, man. You're gonna need it. The sound of the engine faded, leaving Ronan in absolute silence. He stood there for a long moment, studying what he'd bought for $10. The house was worse than he'd imagined. Single-story adobe that might have been white once but had faded to the color of dried bone. Half the roof tiles were missing. One wall had a crack running from foundation to roofline, and every window was either broken or gone entirely. A porch sagged at a dangerous angle, held up by posts that looked like they'd give up any second. Behind the house stood a barn in slightly better condition, though that wasn't saying much. The doors hung at odd angles, and something had punched a hole through one wall large enough for a man to walk through. But it was the corral that made Ronan stop breathing, because standing in the center of it, absolutely motionless, was the horse. Not a horse. The horse. Black as midnight, maybe 16 hands high, with a body that looked carved from solid muscle. Scars crisscrossed his flanks and shoulders, old wounds from barbed wire, from rope burns, from fights. One ear had a chunk missing, his mane was tangled with burrs and desert thorns, and he was staring directly at Ronan with eyes that held something Ronan recognized because he saw it every time he looked in a mirror. Rage, pure and absolute. They stood that way for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, neither moving, neither looking away. Then the horse snorted once, a sound like a threat, and turned his back, dismissing Ronan entirely. "Yeah," Ronan said quietly. "Same to you." He approached the house carefully, testing each porch step before putting weight on it. The front door hung open, just like Martha had said, frozen in place by a hinge that had rusted solid. Inside was chaos and abandonment. A kitchen table still had a coffee cup on it, dried residue at the bottom. Papers were scattered across every surface, handwritten notes, printed articles, photographs. A bookshelf had collapsed, spilling volumes about wild horses and desert ecology across the floor. In the bedroom, the mattress had been shredded by rats or mice, and the closet still held clothes on hangers, waiting for an owner who would never return. But it was the journals that caught Ronan's attention. They were stacked on a desk. Near the window, maybe a dozen of them, leather-bound and filled with cramped handwriting. Ronan picked up the top one, flipped it open to a random page. June 14th, found another carcass in the North Canyon. Mare, maybe 8 years old, shot in the side and left to die. She made it almost a mile before she collapsed. The foal was still trying to nurse when I found them both. These aren't accidents, this is systematic elimination. Ronan set that one down, picked up another. August 3rd, the black stallion came back today. He's watching me from the ridge again. I tried approaching, but he won't let me within 50 yards. Smart. After what they did to his herd, he's got every reason not to trust humans. I don't blame him. I wouldn't trust us either. Another journal, this one more recent based on the dates. October 22nd, I've got everything I need. Financial records, photographs, testimony from 3 former workers willing to talk. Holloway's been running this operation for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Capturing protected horses, selling them to slaughter, bribing officials to look the other way. Tomorrow I'm calling the Federal Wildlife Office. This ends now, October 22nd, 8 months ago, right before Ilyas disappeared. Ronan flipped to the last entry in the final journal. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. They know. Saw trucks at the property line tonight. Called the sheriff, but he won't come out. Called the feds, but they said it'll be 3 days before they can send someone. I don't have 3 days. Moving the evidence tonight. If anything happens to me, it's all buried near the old windmill foundation. Tell someone. Make them look. Then, at the very bottom of the page, one more line in different ink, like it had been added later. He's not dangerous. He's just done being hunted. Ronan stared at those words for a long time. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the corral where the black stallion stood motionless against the dying light. The horse's head turned slightly, watching him back. "Just you and me now," Ronan said to the empty room. 2 things nobody wants, stuck in a place nobody remembers. The horse didn't respond, didn't move. Ronan picked up the journals and started reading from the beginning. If he was going to stay here, and where else did he have to go? He wanted to know what had happened to the man who'd owned this place before him. He wanted to know what Ilyas Vesper had died protecting. Outside, the sun finished setting and the desert went dark. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, something metal banged in the wind, and in the corral, the black stallion stood guard over ground that remembered violence. Ronan read until his eyes burned and his leg cramped and the darkness outside became absolute. The journals painted a picture of a man who'd spent years documenting crimes nobody wanted to acknowledge. Elias had photographed wounded horses, recorded license plates of trucks that had no business being on federal land, collected shell casings from illegal hunts. He tracked financial payments between a development company called Holloway Enterprises and various county officials. He'd interviewed workers who'd quit after being asked to do things their conscience couldn't stomach. And through it all, there was the Stallion. Elias had first spotted him 3 years ago, running with a herd of wild horses in the protected basin. Majestic, Elias had written, the kind of animal that makes you understand why ancient people carved them into cave walls. Then the captures had started. Professional wranglers hired by Holloway to clear the basin for a massive development project, luxury homes, a golf course, tourist facilities. The wild horses were classified as nuisance animals and rounded up in helicopters, driven into pens, and sold to slaughterhouses in Mexico. But the Black Stallion had fought back. According to Elias's notes, the horse had attacked the wranglers' trucks, kicked through fence posts, and led successful escapes. He'd been shot at least twice, roped and dragged behind vehicles, beaten with poles. Each time he'd survived. Each time he'd come back angrier. The last herd capture had happened 13 months ago. The Stallion had watched from a ridge as helicopters chased his family into pens. He'd screamed, that's the word Elias used, screamed, and charged down the slope toward the corrals. They'd shot him then, a clean hit to the shoulder that should have killed him. He disappeared into the desert for 2 months. When he came back alone. His herd was gone. And he'd changed, no longer running, no longer hiding. He'd taken up residence at Elise's ranch like he was claiming territory, like he was waiting for something. November 8th, Alice had written, he's not trying to survive anymore. He's trying to make a point, same as me, I guess. We're both too stubborn to know when we're beaten. Oh, Ronan closed the journal and rubbed his eyes. It was past midnight now. He should sleep, but the house felt too exposed, too open to the darkness outside. Instead, he found a battery-powered lantern in the kitchen that still worked, gathered some of the scattered papers and tried to make sense of the timeline. Elias had planned to contact federal authorities on October 23rd. He'd never made that call. His truck was found at the ranch on October 27th, but Elias was gone. No blood, no signs of struggle, no body, just gone. The sheriff had conducted a minimal search, declared it death by misadventure, and closed the case within 2 weeks. And Holloway Enterprises had immediately tried to buy the ranch through the county tax sale. Ronan stood and walked to the broken window, looking out at the corral. The Stallion was gone, probably roaming the desert, hunting for whatever meager grazing existed out here. Or maybe hunting for something else. Revenge? Ronan almost laughed at the thought. Horses didn't understand revenge. They understood fear and food and territory, but not abstract concepts like justice. Except this horse had stayed here for 8 months after his only ally disappeared, had guarded this place like he knew it mattered, had driven away anyone who tried to approach. Maybe horses understood more than people gave them credit for. Ronan's leg was screaming now, a deep ache that radiated from hip to ankle. He needed to lie down, but the bedroom's destroyed mattress wasn't an option. He settled for the couch in the living room, testing it carefully before lowering himself down. Springs dug into his back and stuffing leaked from a tear in the cushions, but it was better than the floor. He was almost asleep when he heard it. Hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, coming closer. Ronan sat up carefully, reaching for the rusted hunting rifle he'd found in the closet earlier. It probably hadn't been fired in years, might not even work, but it was better than nothing. The hoofbeats stopped just outside the house, then silence. Ronan waited, barely breathing, finger near the trigger, even though he had no intention of shooting the horse. But he didn't know what else might be out there. Coyotes, maybe, mountain lions, or something worse. A shadow moved past the broken window, huge and dark and absolutely silent except for the soft sound of breathing. The stallion was standing on the porch. Ronan could see him through the gaps in the wall, massive and still, his head turned toward the house like he was listening. They stayed that way for what felt like an eternity. Man and horse, separated by crumbling adobe and broken wood, both waiting to see what the other would do. Then the horse snorted once, softer this time, less threatening, and walked away. His hoofbeats faded into the desert night, and the silence returned. Ronan exhaled slowly and set the rifle aside. His hands were shaking. "We're going to have to figure out how this works," he said to the empty room, "because I'm not leaving, and I don't think you are either." No response, of course. Just the wind and the settling of old wood and the vast emptiness of the desert, pressing in from all sides. Ronan lay back down and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the $10 that had bought him this place. He thought about the journals full of evidence that a man had been killed for caring too much. He thought about his sister Celine, who'd spent her whole career prosecuting people who thought they were above the law. He thought about a black horse that refused to give up even after losing everything. And somewhere in the hours before dawn, Ronan Mercer made a decision. He didn't have words for it yet, didn't have a plan, but he felt it settle into his bones like truth. He wasn't here to hide anymore. He was here to finish what Elias started, even if it killed him. The desert morning arrived brutal and bright, heat already building before the sun cleared the horizon. Ronan woke with his leg on fire and his back twisted from the terrible couch. He hobbled to the kitchen, found the water still running from a well that somehow hadn't gone dry, and splashed his face in the sink. Through the window, he could see the stallion had returned. The horse stood in the same spot as yesterday, watching the house with that unnerving intensity. Ronan filled a cracked coffee mug with water and drank it down, then filled it again. He needed a plan. Food would run out in a day or two. He'd grabbed some bread and canned goods from Earl's diner with the last of his borrowed money. The house needed serious work before winter came, and he needed to figure out what Elias had meant about burying evidence near the old windmill foundation. But first, he needed to deal with the horse. Not deal with, that was the wrong word. Coexist with. 'Cause Ronan had no illusions about taming an animal that had survived what this one had survived. You didn't tame trauma. You just learned to live alongside it. He walked outside slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The stallion's ears swiveled toward him immediately, tracking every step, "I know you've got no reason to trust me," Ronan said, his voice carrying across the still morning air. "Hell, I've got no reason to trust you either. But we're both stuck here, and I figure we can either fight each other or fight everyone else. Your call." The horse stared at him. Ronan sat down on the porch steps, wincing as his leg protested. "I read about you, about what they did to your family. I'm sorry. That's worth exactly nothing, I know, but I'm saying it anyway." The stallion took 3 steps forward, not approaching exactly, but not retreating either. Testing. "I lost someone too," Ronan continued, surprised he was saying this out loud. "Her name was Jessica. She trusted me to keep her safe, and I failed. Failed completely. I've been running from that for 2 years, but I think I'm done running." Another step forward from the horse, his nostrils flared, reading scents on the wind. "Elias tried to help you, tried to stop what they were doing. They killed him for it." Ronan's hands clenched. "I'm going to prove that. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened here, but I can't do it alone." The stallion was maybe 20 feet away now, close enough that Ronan could see the scars clearly. Rope burns around his neck and legs, bullet wounds that had healed badly, a brand mark on his shoulder that had been partially burned over, like someone had tried to obscure it. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Ronan said quietly. "I'm just asking you not to kill me while I figure this out." The horse held his gaze for another long moment. Then he turned and walked away, not hurrying, not running, just leaving. Ronan exhaled and stood up. Well, that went better than expected. He spent the rest of the morning searching for the old windmill foundation Elias had mentioned. The property was larger than he'd realized, 40 acres of scrubland and rocks and scattered juniper trees. He found 3 old fence posts, a rusted water tank, and the skeleton of what might have been a chicken coop, but no windmill. It wasn't until early afternoon, when the heat had become genuinely dangerous, that he spotted it. A circular foundation of stacked stones, mostly buried under dirt and brush, about a quarter-mile north of the house. The windmill itself was long gone, probably torn down decades ago, but the foundation remained. Ronan knelt beside it, ignoring the protest from his leg, and started clearing away debris. Dirt, rocks, dead brush. His hands were bleeding before he'd cleared even a quarter of it. Then his fingers hit something solid. Not rock. Metal. He dug faster, heedless of the pain, until he'd uncovered a battered metal toolbox, wedged into a hollow beneath the foundation stones. It took both hands and all his strength to pull it free. The box was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. Ronan smashed it with a rock until it gave way. Inside were the contents of Elias Vesper's life's work. USB drives, file folders sealed in waterproof bags, photographs showing injured horses, trucks with blacked out license plates, men in suits shaking hands with county officials, financial records detailing payments from Holloway Enterprises to shell companies to individual bank accounts to offshore accounts, names, dates, amounts, and at the bottom a letter addressed to whoever finds this. Ronan's hands shook as he opened it. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I knew the risks, I knew what these people were capable of, but I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy something beautiful just to build another golf course for people who have too much money and not enough soul. Everything you need is in this box. Take it to the Federal Wildlife Office in Phoenix. Ask for Caroline Ortega. She's the only one I trust. Tell her Elias Vesper kept his promise. Tell her to finish what I started. And if that black horse is still hanging around, take care of him, if you can. He's earned better than what this world gave him. Elias Ronan sat back on his heels, the letter trembling in his grip. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His leg was screaming again, and he was miles from the house with no water and no shade, but he had everything. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, animal cruelty, and likely murder. Everything Elias had died protecting. The question was what Ronan was going to do with it. He could run, pack up tonight, hitchhike to Phoenix, dump the box with the feds, and disappear again before anyone knew he'd been here. That was the smart play, the safe play. Or he could stay and fight a battle that wasn't his, against people who had already killed once to keep their secrets buried, stay in a falling apart house in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a traumatized horse for company, stay and probably end up as dead as Elias. Ronan looked up at the sky, cloudless and brutal and indifferent. "What would you do, Celine?" he asked the empty air. He knew the answer. His sister had spent her entire career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She'd given up higher paying jobs, safer positions, easier cases, because she believed in justice even when justice was hard. Ronan had spent 2 years hating himself for failing Jessica. Maybe it was time to try not failing someone else. He gathered the toolbox carefully, secured it as best he could, and started the long walk back to the house. The sun was setting by the time he made it. His leg barely functional, his skin burned despite his attempts to stay covered, The stallion was waiting in the corral again. "Found it," Ronan called out as he limped past. "Found everything. Now I just have to figure out what to do with it." The horse watched him enter the house, but didn't move. Ronan set the toolbox on the kitchen table and collapsed into a chair. He needed water, food, rest. But first he needed to understand what he had. He spent the next hours going through everything methodically. The USB drives contained spreadsheets, emails, recorded phone calls. The photographs were damning. Horses with injuries consistent with helicopter harassment, dead foals, corrals packed with terrified animals, awaiting transport to slaughter. The financial records were a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, but the pattern was clear. Holloway Enterprises paid for illegal horse removals, then sold the land to developers for massive profits. County officials got kickbacks to look the other way. Even the sheriff's office had received consulting fees. It was systematic corruption on a scale that would require federal intervention to untangle, which meant Ronan needed to contact Caroline Ortega at the Federal Wildlife Office, which meant using a phone he didn't have in a town with no cell service. He'd have to go back to Caldera Springs in the morning, use the payphone outside Earl's Diner, make the call that would start everything in motion, the call that would put a target on his back just like it had put one on Elias's. Ronan looked at the journals still stacked on the desk, at the evidence spread across the table, at the broken house that had become his home because he had nowhere else to go. Then he looked out the window at the black stallion standing guard in the fading light. "We're all in now," he said quietly. "No turning back." The horse's ears flicked toward the house like he was listening, like he understood, and maybe, in some way that transcended words and species, he did. Because they were the same, Ronan realized. Both damaged beyond easy repair, both carrying scars that would never fully heal. Both standing on ground where someone good had died trying to do the right thing, both refusing to run anymore. Ronan spent that night reading the rest of Elias's journals by lantern light, committing names and dates to memory, building a framework of understanding. When exhaustion finally dragged him towards sleep, he moved to the couch again, the rifle within reach. But this time, when he heard hoofbeats outside, he didn't reach for the weapon. He just listened as the stallion circled the house once, twice, 3 times, like a sentry, checking the perimeter. Protecting or threatening, Ronan couldn't say. Maybe both, maybe neither, maybe just existing alongside another damaged thing in a broken world, both trying to figure out how to survive another day. The hoofbeats faded, the desert settled into silence, and Ronan Mercer, who had bought a ghost ranch for $10 and inherited a war he didn't start, finally closed his eyes and slept. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences. Tonight, he was just a man in a broken house with a traumatized horse, standing guard outside. That was enough, for now. The morning Ronan decided to call his sister, the stallion was gone. Not unusual, the horse came and went on his own schedule, disappearing into the basin for hours or sometimes days at a time, but something about the empty corral felt wrong. Like the absence itself was a warning. Ronan ignored the feeling. He had bigger problems. The walk back to Caldera Springs took 3 hours in heat that could kill a man if he wasn't careful. His leg gave out twice, forcing him to rest in whatever shade he could find. A scraggly juniper tree, an overhanging rock formation. By the time he limped into town, his shirt was soaked through, and his vision had started to blur at the edges. Earl took one look at him and poured a glass of ice water without a word. "You look like hell," the old man said. "Feel worse." Ronan drained the glass, then held it out for more. "I need to use a phone." "Payphones out back. Costs $1 for long distance." Ronan set 2 crumpled bills on the counter, borrowed from the emergency 20 he'd found in Elias's desk drawer. Keep the change. The payphone was a relic from another era, the kind with a metal cord and buttons that stuck when you pressed them. Ronan fed in the money and dialed the number he'd memorized 2 years ago, but never had the courage to use. It rang 4 times. He was about to hang up when someone picked up. Celine Mercer. Her voice was clipped, professional, the voice of someone who didn't have time for interruptions. Celine? It's me. Silence. Then, Ronan? Yeah. Where the hell are you? The professional tone cracked. I've been calling every hospital, every shelter, Do you have any idea what it's been like not knowing if you were dead? In a ditch somewhere. I'm sorry. You're sorry. She laughed, sharp and bitter. 2 years, Ronan. 2 years of nothing. And now you call and say you're sorry? I know. And I don't have an excuse you'll want to hear, but I need help. Another pause. He could hear her breathing, could imagine her standing in her office in Phoenix, probably surrounded by case files and legal briefs, trying to decide whether to hang up or listen. What kind of help? She asked finally. The kind you're good at, federal corruption, wildlife crimes, probably murder. Jesus Christ, Ronan, what did you get yourself into? So he told her. Not everything. The payphone would eat his money before he got through the whole story, but enough. The ranch, the journals, Elias Vesper's disappearance, the evidence buried near the Windmill Foundation, Holloway Enterprises and their systematic elimination of wild horses to clear land for development. When he finished, Celine was quiet for a long moment. You said murder, she said. You have proof? I have evidence that suggests it. Elias was going to the feds with documentation of illegal operations. Then he vanished, his body was never found, but you think someone made him disappear. I know someone did. Celine exhaled slowly. This isn't my jurisdiction. I prosecute white-collar crimes for the state. What you're describing needs federal wildlife authorities, maybe FBI if there's evidence of murder. I know, but I need you to tell me if what I have is enough, if it's worth pursuing, or if you're wasting your time on another crusade that'll get you killed. Celine's voice went hard. Like the one that got Jessica killed? The words hit like a fist. Ronan closed his eyes. That's not fair, he managed. Isn't it? You've been running toward death for 2 years, Ronan. Now you're telling me you've landed in the middle of some conspiracy involving people who've already killed once. You want my professional opinion? Get out. Leave the evidence somewhere. The feds will find it and disappear before whoever killed Elias decides to finish the job. I can't do that. Why not? Because someone needs to finish what he started. It doesn't have to be you. Who else is there? Ronan's hand tightened on the receiver. Everyone in this town is either scared or bought off. The sheriff's on their payroll. County officials are taking bribes. Elias died alone trying to protect animals nobody cared about. And if I walk away, it'll keep happening. They'll keep killing, keep destroying, 'cause nobody with power gives a damn. And you think you can stop them? You, with no money, no resources, no legal authority? No? Ronan said quietly. But you can. Silence. God damn it, Ronan. I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk. Just help me get this to the right people. Tell me who to contact, what evidence they need, how to make sure it doesn't disappear into a filing cabinet somewhere. He heard papers rustling on her end, the sound of a pen clicking. There's a federal wildlife investigator named Caroline Ortega, Celine said finally. She works out of the Phoenix office. I've dealt with her on a few cross-jurisdictional cases. She's good, thorough, won't drop something just because it's complicated. Elias mentioned her in his letter, said she was the only one he trusted. Then Elias had good instincts. More rustling. I'm going to give you her direct number. When you call, use my name. Tell her I said she should listen to you. But Ronan? Yeah? If you're lying to me, if this is some paranoid delusion, and you're wasting federal resources on conspiracy theories, I will never forgive you. Understand? I understand. She gave him the number. He wrote it on his palm with a pen borrowed from Earl. Are you safe where you are? Celine asked, her voice softer now. Define safe. That's what I thought. A sigh. Call Ortega today. Don't wait. And Ronan? Once you make that call, there's no taking it back. You're going to be involved in whatever investigation follows. These people will know your name. They probably already do. Then be careful, please. The line went dead before he could respond. Ronan stood there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone until Earl knocked on the door. You done in there? Got other customers waiting? There were no other customers, but Ronan took the hint. He hung up and dialed the number Celine had given him. Caroline Ortega answered on the second ring. Special Agent Ortega, Fish and Wildlife. My name is Ronan Mercer. Celine Mercer told me to call you. I have information about illegal wild horse operations in Caldera County. A pause. Celine Mercer from the state prosecutor's office? That's right. She said you worked together. We have. Ortega's tone shifted, became focused. What kind of information are we talking about? Financial records, photographs, witness testimony, evidence of systematic horse captures on federal land, bribes paid to county officials, animals sold to slaughter facilities in violation of protection laws. Everything collected by a man named Elias Vesper before he disappeared 8 months ago. Disappeared as in missing? Disappeared as in murdered, most likely. He was about to bring this to your office when he vanished. Now I have everything he died protecting. Another pause, longer this time. Where are you right now? Caldera Springs? Small town about, I know where it is. Keys clicking in the background. Stay where you are. I'm sending 2 agents to meet you. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't make copies. Don't. I already made copies, Ronan interrupted. And I've already talked to people. I'm not stupid enough to keep the only evidence in one place. Smart. Ortega sounded impressed despite herself. My agents will be there in approximately 3 hours. Meet them at... She paused. Is there a sheriff's office in Caldera Springs? There is, but the sheriff's brother-in-law works for the company I'm reporting. I wouldn't trust him with parking violations. Noted. Meet my agents at the county assessor's office instead. You know where that is? I do. 3 hours, Mr. Mercer. Don't disappear before then. She hung up. Ronan walked back into the diner and slumped into a booth. Earl brought him coffee without asking. You stirring up trouble? The old man asked. Finishing trouble someone else started? That's what Eli said too, right before he vanished. Earl wiped down the counter, even though it was already clean. You sure you know what you're doing? Not even a little bit. At least you're honest about it. Earl refilled the coffee. On the house. You look like you need it. The 3 hours crawled past. Ronan sat in that booth watching the street, half expecting black SUVs to roll up with armed men inside. But the only traffic was Martha driving by in her ancient sedan and a delivery truck that got lost looking for an address that didn't exist. When the federal agents finally arrived, they came in an unmarked sedan that looked government issue from a mile away. 2 of them, a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back tight, and a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The woman spotted Ronan through the diner window and headed straight for him. Ronan Mercer? That's me. Special Agent Diana Reeves. This is Agent Tom Cho. Caroline Ortega sent us. She slid into the booth across from him. You have evidence of federal wildlife crimes? Ronan set the waterproof bag containing the USB drives and selected documents on the table. Elias Vesper spent 3 years documenting illegal horse captures on protected federal land. The operation was run by a development company called Holloway Enterprises. They paid county officials to look the other way, bribed the sheriff's office, and likely murdered Elias when he threatened to expose them. Agent Cho picked up the bag carefully. "Where's the rest?" "Hidden. I'll tell you where once I'm sure this is being taken seriously." "We don't negotiate for evidence," Reeves said flatly. "I'm not negotiating. I'm being careful. The last guy who had this evidence ended up dead." Reeves and Cho exchanged a look. Then Reeves pulled out a tablet and opened a recording app. "Start from the beginning. Everything." So Ronan did. He talked for an hour, interrupted occasionally by questions. Reeves took notes. Cho examined the documents with increasing interest. By the time Ronan finished, Earl had brought them all lunch, sandwiches that nobody ate. "This is substantial," Reeves said finally. "If even half of what you're saying is accurate, we're looking at multiple federal violations, conspiracy, fraud, violations of the Wild Horse and Burro Act, possible murder." "It's all accurate? We'll verify that." Reeves closed her tablet. "In the meantime, you need to understand something. The moment we start investigating Holloway Enterprises, they're going to know someone talked. They're going to come looking for whoever gave us this information. Let them look. You don't seem concerned." "I'm terrified," Ronan said honestly, "but I'm more tired of running than I am scared of dying." Cho spoke for the first time. "Where's the rest of the evidence?" "Buried at the ranch. I'll take you there." They drove in convoy, the agent's sedan following Ronan in a truck he'd borrowed from Earl, with promises to return it intact. The drive out to the ranch felt longer than usual, maybe because Ronan kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see other vehicles following. But the road stayed empty. The Stallion was back when they arrived, standing in his usual spot near the corral. He watched the sedan with visible suspicion, ears pinned flat. "That's a big horse," Cho observed. "That's Ashfang," Ronan said, though he hadn't planned on naming the animal until the word came out. "He belonged to the herd that was captured, only survivor." "He friendly?" "He's not anything. Stay away from him unless you want to get kicked into next week." They excavated the rest of the evidence from the windmill foundation while Ashfang watched from a distance. Reeves went through everything methodically, photographing each item, documenting chain of custody, treating it like the crime scene it was. "This is good work," she said, handling one of Elias's journals. "Detailed, dated, corroborated with physical evidence. Whoever this Vespa was, he knew what he was doing. He was a good man trying to stop bad people. And he paid for it." Reeves looked up at the desert surrounding them. "You understand you're in real danger staying here? Nowhere else to go. We could arrange protective custody." Ronan almost laughed. "You going to put the horse in protective custody too?" "The horse isn't a witness." "No, but he's the reason Elias died. Someone needs to make sure that meant something." Reeves studied him for a long moment. "You planning to testify if this goes to trial?" "If it helps put them away, yeah." "It will. Your testimony about finding the evidence, about Vesper's journals, about the conditions here, it'll be crucial." She stood, brushing dirt off her knees. "We'll need you to come to Phoenix at some point, give a formal statement. But for now, we have enough to start building a case." They packed everything into evidence boxes and loaded them into the sedan. Cho did another sweep of the windmill foundation, making sure they hadn't missed anything. As they were preparing to leave, Reeves handed Ronan a card. "My direct number. If anything happens, if anyone comes around asking questions, if you see suspicious vehicles, anything at all, you call me immediately. Understand?" Ronan pocketed the cards. "Understood." "I mean it, Mr. Mercer. These people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again. I know. The agents left their sedan kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. Ronan stood there watching until they were gone, then turned to find Ashfang had moved closer. The horse was maybe 30 feet away now, the closest he'd ever been voluntarily. "Guess it's just us again," Ronan said. Ashfang's ears swiveled forward, listening. "You think I'm crazy for staying? Yeah, probably, but I'm tired of being the guy who runs when things get hard. I'm tired of being the guy who lets other people die while I survive." The horse took 3 steps closer, so 25 feet now. "I'm going to fix this place up, make it livable, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what happened to your family, what they did to you." Ronan's voice caught. "I can't bring them back, can't undo what was done, but I can make sure it stops. That has to count for something." Ashfang stared at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. Then he snorted once and walked away, not hurrying, just leaving. Ronan watched him go and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly, more like purpose. The kind of purpose that came from deciding to stand instead of run, even when standing was the stupider choice. He spent the rest of the day working on the house. The roof needed patching before the next rain. The broken windows needed boarding up. The sagging porch needed reinforcement. Most of it required materials he couldn't afford, but he could at least clear debris, shore up weak points with scrap wood, make the place marginally safer. The physical work felt good. Mindless and exhausting in a way that quieted the constant noise in his head. By the time the sun started setting, he'd managed to stabilize the worst of the porch and clear out 2 rooms that had been filled with junk. He was hauling trash to a burn pile when he heard the trucks. 2 of them coming fast down the road from town. Black pickups with aftermarket modifications, lift kits, brush guards, the kind of aggressive masculinity that screamed compensation issues. Ronan's stomach dropped. The truck skidded to a stop in front of the house, throwing up clouds of dust. 6 men climbed out, all wearing work clothes and expressions that promised violence. The last one out was taller than the rest, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had been handsome once before alcohol and cruelty had worn it down. He walked forward with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "You Ronan Mercer?" His voice was smooth, almost friendly, the kind of friendly that meant danger. "Who's asking?" "Kate Holloway. I own Holloway Enterprises, which means I own most of the land around here, including the basin where you've been poking around." "Actually, I own this land. Bought it legal and recorded with the county." Kate smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's so. See, I had a deal to buy this property. Tax sale. Then some bureaucrat screwed up the paperwork and now you're squatting on land that should be mine." "I'm not squatting. I own it. For now." Kate gestured to his men. They spread out, casual but deliberate, cutting off potential escape routes. "But here's the thing. This land is part of a major development project. Golf course, luxury homes, the whole package. We've got investors lined up, construction scheduled to start in 3 months. Can't have some drifter getting in the way of progress. Then you should have thought of that before you murdered the last owner." The words hung in the air like a thrown knife. Kate's smile disappeared. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact. Elias Vesper was going to expose your illegal operations, so you had him killed. Then you tried to buy his land before anyone could investigate. You've been reading too many conspiracy theories, son. Elias wandered off into the desert and died. Happens out here. Old men get confused, lose their way. He was 56 and knew the desert better than anyone. Accidents happen." Kate took a step closer. His men mirrored the movement. "Just like they might happen to you if you keep spreading lies about my business." Ronan's hand moved toward the knife on his belt. "Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing." "I wouldn't do that," Kate said softly. "My boys here are armed. You're not. Math doesn't work in your favor." Federal agents already have the evidence. Whatever you do to me won't stop what's coming. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Kate's face. What evidence? Everything Elias collected, financial records, photographs, witness statements. I handed it over to Fish and Wildlife this afternoon. They're building a case right now. Kate's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Special Agent Diana Reeves. You can call her if you want. She'll confirm she has everything. One of Kate's men, a younger guy with a shaved head, spoke up. Boss, if the feds are involved, shut up. Kate didn't take his eyes off Ronan. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. Tonight, you're going to get in whatever vehicle you came in, drive to the nearest bus station, and disappear. If you do that, we forget this conversation ever happened. And if I don't, then you disappear anyway, just not voluntarily. Kate's hand moved to his belt where a pistol was holstered. Last guy who wouldn't listen ended up feeding coyotes in a canyon. That what you want? Ronan's heart was hammering, but he kept his voice steady. You're admitting you killed Elias. I'm saying bad things happen to people who don't know when to quit. Elias didn't know. Question is, are you smarter than he was? Before Ronan could answer, a sound split the evening air. A scream, high-pitched, furious, unmistakably equine. Everyone turned. Ashfang was charging down from the ridge, moving at full gallop, his black coat gleaming in the dying light. He looked massive, apocalyptic, like something out of a nightmare. What the hell? One of the men started. The stallion didn't slow down. He came straight at the group, head low, teeth bared. Men scattered, diving behind trucks, scrambling for safety. One of them pulled a gun, but couldn't get a clear shot without hitting his own people. Ashfang skidded to a stop between Ronan and Cade's men, wheeling to face them, hooves striking sparks off the rocks. His message was unmistakable. Back off. Cade had drawn his pistol. Someone shoot that thing! No! Ronan stepped forward, putting himself between the gun and the horse. You fire that weapon and the feds will hear about it before you make it back to town. Get out of the way. Not happening. They stood there in a standoff, Cade with his gun, Ronan unarmed, and Ashfang behind him, radiating barely controlled violence. The other men had climbed back into the trucks, clearly wanting no part of whatever came next. Finally, Cade lowered the gun, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he said quietly. Wouldn't be the first time. And Cade climbed back into his truck. Before slamming the door, he pointed at Ronan. Enjoy the ranch while you can. Won't be yours much longer. The trucks roared away, engines screaming in frustrated rage. Ronan's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the ground, shaking. Behind him, Ashfang snorted and pawed at the dirt, still agitated. Thanks, Ronan managed. That was... Thanks. The horse looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked over, and stood beside Ronan, close enough to touch, though Ronan didn't dare try. They stayed like that as the sun finished setting and the desert cooled. Man and horse both understanding they'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes began their evening song. And in Caldera Springs, Cade Holloway was probably already making phone calls to people who specialized in making problems disappear. Ronan knew he should be terrified. Instead, he felt almost calm. The war had started. At least now he knew which side he was on. The calm lasted exactly 4 days. Ronan spent those days fortifying the ranch as best he could, with no money and borrowed tools. He fixed the worst holes in the roof using scrap metal from the collapsed barn. He reinforced the front door with planks torn from the old corral fence. He even managed to get the ancient generator working long enough to charge Elias's emergency radio. A battered device that picked up mostly static but occasionally caught snippets of news from Phoenix. Ashfang stayed close during those days, never approaching within arm's reach, but never wandering far either. The horse had established a routine, mornings spent grazing in the basin, afternoons in the shade near the house, evenings on the ridge, watching the sunset, like he was keeping guard or waiting for something. On the fourth night, the weather changed. Ronan felt it before he saw it. A drop in temperature, a shift in the wind that carried the smell of ozone and distant rain. By sunset, clouds were building on the horizon, dark and massive, stacking up like threads. The monsoon season had arrived 3 weeks early. He'd just finished boarding up the last broken window when he heard vehicles again. Not trucks this time, ATVs, their high-pitched engines whining through the desert silence. At least 4 of them, maybe more, coming from different directions, surrounding him. Ronan grabbed Elias's rifle and checked the chamber, still loaded with the same ancient ammunition he'd found weeks ago. No way to know if the rounds would even fire, but it was better than nothing. The first fat raindrops hit as the ATVs came into view, 6 of them running without headlights, spread out in a loose perimeter around the ranch. Men in dark clothes and ball caps, faces covered with bandanas. Professional. Organized. Not here to talk. Ronan's phone, Earl had lent him an old flip phone that barely worked, buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out one-handed, keeping the rifle trained on the nearest ATV. Unknown number. Yeah? Mr. Mercer, it's Agent Reeves. We have a situation. No kidding. I've got 6 armed men surrounding my property right now. A pause. We're 40 minutes out. The local sheriff's office isn't responding to our calls. Do you have somewhere you can secure yourself? The house, maybe? Lock yourself inside and don't engage. We're coming as fast as we can. They're not here to wait 40 minutes. Ronan, he hung up. The ATVs had stopped moving, engines idling just outside the property line, waiting for something. An order, probably. Or for full darkness. Thunder rumbled overhead. The rain picked up, going from drops to a steady downpour in seconds. Desert storms didn't mess around. Ronan moved to the porch, using the doorframe for cover. His leg was already aching from the damp, from stress, from 2 years of damage that would never fully heal. "You're trespassing," he called out. "Federal agents are on their way." One of the men dismounted and walked forward. Even through the rain, Ronan recognized the confident stride. Cade Holloway. "You should have left when I gave you the chance," Cade shouted over the storm. "Now it's too late for the easy way." "What's the hard way? You kill me like you killed Elias?" "Elias made a choice. So did you." Cade gestured to his men. "We're taking the horse. You can either hand him over or we take him anyway. Your call." Ronan's grip tightened on the rifle. "The horse isn't mine to give. He's wild. He's an obstacle to a $30 million development project. That makes him a problem that needs solving." "By killing him?" "By removing him. What happens after that isn't your concern." Cade's hand moved to his belt. "Last chance, Mercer. Walk away now, and you might live through this." Lightning split the sky, turning everything white for half a second. In that flash, Ronan saw more men than he'd thought. At least 10, all armed, all moving into position. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and 40 minutes from any help. "No?" he said. "What?" "I said no. You want the horse, you go through me." Cade laughed, harsh and disbelieving. "You're willing to die for an animal? A wild horse you don't even own?" "I'm willing to die for something that matters. You wouldn't understand that." "You're right, I don't." Cade pulled his pistol. "Boys, he's all yours." The men moved forward in a coordinated rush. Ronan fired the rifle, one shot that cracked through the storm and sent the nearest man diving for cover. But before he could work the bolt for a second round, something heavy slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the porch hard, the rifle skittering away. His shoulder was on fire, not a bullet, just someone's tackle. But it didn't matter. Hands grabbed him, yanked him to his feet, slammed him against the wall. "Where's the horse?" someone demanded. "Where does he go?" Ronan tasted blood. "Go to hell." A fist connected with his ribs. Then another. He tried to fight back, but there were too many of them, too many hands holding him down. Through the rain and the pain, he heard Kate's voice. "Forget him. Find the animal." The men released him, letting him collapse onto the porch. Ronan tried to stand, but his leg gave out, sending him down hard on the wet wood. He could only watch as the men spread out across the property, searching. They had ropes, poles with loops on the end, tranquilizer guns. They'd done this before. Thunder rolled again, closer now. The storm was directly overhead, rain coming down in sheets that turned the world into a grey blur. Ronan crawled toward the rifle, fingers closing around the stock, just as someone kicked it away. "Stay down," the man warned. "You're done." But Ronan wasn't done. He couldn't be done. He'd promised himself he wouldn't run, wouldn't quit, wouldn't let another person or animal die because he was too broken to help. He tried to stand again, made it to one knee before dizziness nearly dropped him. Then he heard it, a scream that cut through the storm like a blade. Ashfang, the stallion, came charging out of the darkness, eyes wild, mane plastered to his neck by rain. He'd been up in the basin, probably sheltering from the storm, but now he was here, and he was furious. One of Kate's men tried to rope him. Ashfang dodged with impossible agility, then spun and kicked out with both hind legs. The impact sent the man flying backward into the mud. "Get him!" Kate was shouting. "Contain that animal!" More men moved in with poles and ropes. Ashfang fought like something possessed, teeth snapping, hooves striking anything that came close. But there were too many of them, and they knew what they were doing. They were herding him, pushing him toward the old corral where they could trap him. Ronan watched it happening and felt something break inside him. Not his body, that was already broken. Something deeper, the part of him that had survived the accident, survived 2 years of running, survived becoming someone he didn't recognize. That part was done being passive. He lunged for the nearest man, the one who'd kicked the rifle away, and caught him in a tackle that sent them both crashing into the mud. Ronan got one good punch in before someone pulled him off, but it felt like a victory. Anyway, "Tie him up," Kate ordered. "I'm done with this." They zip-tied Ronan's hands behind his back and dragged him to his feet. Made him watch as they finally cornered Ashfang against the corral fence. The horse was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, heaving with exhaustion, but still fighting, still refusing to quit. One of the men raised a tranquilizer rifle. "No!" Ronan struggled against his restraints. "Don't!" The rifle fired. The dart hit Ashfang in the shoulder. The horse screamed again, rearing up, trying to shake it loose. But the drug was already working. His movements became sluggish, uncoordinated. He was going down. Ronan felt tears mixing with rain on his face. "You bastards, you!" Cade walked over and grabbed Ronan by the hair, forcing his head up. "You see that? That's what happens when you get in my way. Now you're gonna watch as we load that animal into a trailer and haul him away. And then you're gonna disappear, just like Elias." "The feds know everything," Ronan managed. "You can't hide anymore." "Sure I can. Money buys a lot of silence. By the time any investigation gets moving, I'll have sold off the land and moved the profits offshore. They might eventually prove something, but I'll be long gone." Lightning flashed again. In that moment of brightness, Ronan saw Ashfang on his knees, still trying to stand, still fighting the drugs, pulling him under, still refusing to surrender. "He won't go quietly," Ronan said. "Even drugged, he'll fight, and someone will see, someone will talk." "Not if there's no one left to talk about." Cade pulled out his pistol and pressed it against Ronan's temple. "I gave you a chance. You didn't take it. Now we do this the permanent way." The metal was cold against Ronan's skin. He could hear his own heartbeat loud and fast, drowning out everything else. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a motorcycle crash, not in some hospital bed, but here, in the mud, next to a drugged horse killed by men who valued profit over life. At least he tried. At least he'd stood for something. Jessica would understand, maybe even forgive him. Kate's finger tightened on the trigger. Then headlights exploded through the darkness. Not one vehicle. 3. Coming fast down the road, tires throwing up sprays of mud and water. They skidded to stops in a loose semicircle and people poured out. Federal agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that got lost in the storm. "Drop your weapons! Federal agents! Hands where we can see them! On the ground now!" Chaos erupted. Kate's men scrambled, some trying to run, others throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. The ATVs roared to life as men tried to escape into the desert. But the feds had blocked the main routes. Kate released Ronan and stepped back, the gun still in his hand. For a moment, Ronan thought he might actually try to shoot his way out. Then Agent Reeves stepped into view, her own weapon trained on Kate's chest. "Kate Holloway, drop the weapon and get on your knees." "This is private property," Kate said. His voice had lost its smoothness, cracking at the edges. "You have no jurisdiction. This is federal land under investigation for wildlife crimes. We have every jurisdiction. Drop the weapon." Another agent, Cho, moved to Ronan's side and cut the zip ties. "You hurt? I'll live." Ronan's hands were numb from the restraints. "The horse. We've got a wildlife vet with us. She's checking him now." Ronan turned and saw a woman in a rain-slicked jacket kneeling next to Ashfang. The stallion was still conscious but barely, eyes rolling, legs unable to hold his weight. "How much did they give him?" the vet was asking one of the captured men. "2 darts, maybe 3. I don't know. What kind of dosage? How should I know? We just use what we're told." The vet swore and pulled out her phone, calling someone. "I need a large animal emergency kit at these coordinates. Tranquilizer overdose, probably ketamine-based. Fast." Ronan stumbled over to where Ashfang lay. The horse's breathing was shallow, labored. His eyes found Ronan's and held them, still aware, still present, but fading. "Stay with me," Ronan said quietly. "Don't quit now, not after everything." He didn't know if horses understood words. Didn't matter. He kept talking anyway, keeping his voice low and steady, telling Ashfang about the ranch they'd rebuild, about the sanctuary Elias had dreamed of, about wild herds running free in protected basins. The vet was working now, checking vital signs, preparing injections. "His heart rate's dropping. If we don't reverse this soon..." "Do whatever you need to do," Reeves said. "Save that animal." Around them, agents were rounding up Cade's men, reading rights, securing the scene. Cade himself was in handcuffs, being led to one of the vehicles. He looked diminished somehow, smaller, without his gun, and his crew, and his confidence. He caught Ronan's eye as they passed. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah," Ronan replied. "It is." The vet administered something, Ronan didn't catch what, and waited, monitoring Ashfang's breathing. Seconds crawled past. The rain continued falling, washing blood and mud into the earth. Then Ashfang's breathing steadied, deepened. His eyes, which had been glazing over, regained some focus. "He's stabilizing," the vet said. "But he's not out of danger yet. We need to get him somewhere we can monitor him properly." "We can't move him," Ronan protested. "The stress will kill him less than leaving him here in the rain with no shelter and no monitoring equipment." The vet looked at him directly. "You want to save this horse? Trust me to do my job." A mobile veterinary unit arrived 20 minutes later. A truck equipped with everything needed to transport and treat large animals. It took 6 people and a portable ramp to get Ashfang loaded. The horse was conscious but uncoordinated, legs not quite working right, requiring constant support to keep from falling. Ronan wanted to go with him, needed to, but Reeves pulled him aside. "We need your statements while everything's fresh. The vet will take good care of him, I promise." "Where are they taking him?" "Wildlife rehabilitation facility outside Phoenix, best in the state." She guided him toward one of the vehicles, out of the rain. "Now tell me exactly what happened here." So Ronan did. Again, all of it, from Cade's arrival to the attempted capture to the gun against his head. Reeves recorded everything, asked clarifying questions, took photographs of his injuries. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean and dripping. Bodies in federal custody, 8 of Cade's men, plus Cade himself. Evidence seized, weapons, tranquilizer equipment, ATVs, phones containing text messages that would probably prove coordination and conspiracy. "This is good," Reeves said, reviewing her notes. "Really good. Between what happened tonight and the evidence you provided earlier, we've got enough to charge Holloway with multiple federal crimes, wildlife violations, conspiracy, assault, attempted murder." "What about Elias's murder?" "That's harder. We still don't have a body, and without physical evidence, there has to be something. Records, communications, someone who'll talk. We're working on it. Now that we have Holloway in custody, his men might start flipping. Loyalty tends to evaporate when people are facing 20 years in federal prison." Cho approached, holding an evidence bag. "Found this in Holloway's truck. Inside was a phone, newer model, expensive. The kind someone might use for business they didn't want traced." "We'll need a warrant for the contents," Reeves said. "Already called the US Attorney's Office. They're drafting it now." Cho grinned. "Funny thing about guys like Holloway. They always think they're too smart to get caught, which means they keep records of everything." Agent Reeves turned back to Ronan. "You should get checked out. Hospital in Caldera Springs might not be much, but I'm not going anywhere until I know Ashfang's okay. The horse could be in recovery for days. Then I'll wait days." Reeves sighed. "You're as stubborn as Vesper was." "I'll take that as a compliment." She almost smiled. "It was meant as one. Come on, I'll drive you to the rehab facility myself. You can see your horse, then we'll get you somewhere safe while we process all this." The drive to Phoenix took 2 hours. Ronan spent most of it staring out the window, watching the desert roll past, trying to process everything that had happened. He'd come to Caldera Springs, looking for a place to disappear. Instead, he'd found a war, and somehow he'd survived the first real battle. But at what cost? The wildlife rehabilitation facility was larger than Ronan expected. Multiple buildings surrounded by paddocks and enclosures, all designed for treating injured or traumatized animals. The vet who treated Ashfang met them at the entrance. "Dr. Sarah Chen," she introduced herself. "Your horse is in intensive care. His vitals are stable now, but the next 24 hours are critical." "Can I see him?" "Briefly. He's sedated, lightly, just enough to keep him calm while we monitor his recovery. No sudden movements, no loud noises." She led Ronan through the facility to a large stall equipped with monitoring equipment. Ashfang lay on his side on thick bedding, eyes closed, breathing steadily. IV lines ran to his neck. Monitors beeped softly. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable. "He's a fighter," Dr. Chen said quietly. "I've treated a lot of wild horses, and most of them would have given up by now. The trauma he's endured, the stress of tonight, but he's still here." Ronan moved closer, careful not to startle the horse. He knelt beside Ashfang's head, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath. "You're going to be okay," he said softly. "I'm going to make sure of it. Whatever it takes. Ashfang's ear twitched. A small movement, but it meant he was listening. Dr. Chen checked one of the monitors. His heart rate just changed. Slowed down. Actually, that's good. Means he's relaxing. Because he knows I'm here? Because animals are better at reading intention than people realize. He knows you're not a threat. She made a note on her clipboard. You can stay for a few more minutes, but then he needs rest. So do you, judging by the state of you. Ronan hadn't looked in a mirror, but he could imagine. Bruised, muddy, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Exhausted in a way that went bone deep. But alive. They were both alive. That had to count for something. He stayed until Dr. Chen insisted he leave, then let Reeves drive him to a motel where the federal government was footing the bill. It was clean and quiet and had a shower that actually worked, luxury compared to the ranch. Ronan stood under hot water until it ran cold, watching mud and blood swirl down the drain, trying to wash away the memory of Cade's gun against his temple, the moment he'd thought was his last. But it hadn't been. Against all odds, he was still here. The question was, what came next? He slept for 16 hours straight, waking only when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He fumbled for it, heart racing, half expecting threats. Instead, "This is Celine. Agent Reeves gave me your number. Call me." Ronan dialed before his brain fully caught up. "Ronan?" His sister's voice was strained. "Are you okay? Reeves told me what happened." "I'm fine. Bruised, but fine." "You almost died." It wasn't a question. "Almost doesn't count." "Don't joke." "I'm serious. When Reeves called and told me they'd found you with a gun to your head," her voice broke, "I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't lose me. I'm here. I'm okay." Silence on the line. Then, "I'm coming to Phoenix." "You don't have to." "I'm coming. I need to see you. Make sure you're real. And not just another call I'll regret not making." She paused. "And because I think you're going to need a lawyer. A good one." "I didn't do anything illegal." "No, but you're about to be the star witness in a massive federal case. Trust me, you want legal representation, someone looking out for your interests." Ronan leaned back against the headboard. "When did you become the responsible sibling?" "When you decided to take on a criminal enterprise with nothing but a rusty rifle and a death wish?" But there was warmth in her voice now, almost affection. "I'll be there tomorrow. Don't do anything stupid before then." "No promises." She hung up. Ronan stared at the phone, something unfamiliar expanding in his chest. Hope, maybe? Or just relief that someone gave a damn whether he lived or died. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Agent Reeves. "Holloway's phone records are a gold mine. We found communications with the former sheriff coordinating Vesper's disappearance. Body recovery team is searching the North Canyon now. We'll update when we know more." Ronan's hands tightened on the phone. They were close. Close to proving what had happened to Elias. Close to justice. He spent the rest of the day at the rehab facility, sitting outside Ashfang's stall, watching the horse sleep. Dr. Chen gave him updates, vitals improving, drug levels dropping, chances of full recovery increasing. By evening, Ashfang was awake, still weak, still monitored, but conscious and aware. When Ronan approached the stall, the horse's eyes tracked him, recognized him. "Hey," Ronan said quietly, "remember me? The idiot who bought a ghost ranch and nearly got us both killed?" Ashfang's ears swiveled forward. "They're going to find Elias, prove what happened to him, and then everyone's going to know what these people did. To him, to you, to all the horses they slaughtered." Ronan's voice roughened. "It won't bring anyone back, but it's something." The horse watched him with those dark, intelligent eyes. Still wary, still scarred, but something had shifted between them. some understanding that transcended species and trauma. They'd both survived. Against impossible odds, they were still here. Dr. Chen appeared beside him. He's doing remarkably well. If he continues improving at this rate, we might be able to release him in a week or two. Release him where? The ranch is still a crime scene. Actually, Agent Reeves called earlier. The scene's been processed and released. You can go back whenever you're ready. She paused, though I'd recommend making it more secure before you bring an animal back. Ronan nodded slowly. The ranch. His ranch. The place he'd bought for $10 and nearly died defending. He'd have to go back eventually. Fix what was broken, make it livable, turn it into something Elias would have been proud of, but first, he needed to see this through, testify when the time came, make sure Cade and everyone involved went to prison for what they'd done, give Elias's death meaning, give all those dead horses meaning. His phone buzzed, another text from Reeves, found him. North Canyon, exactly where you said. Preliminary examination confirms gunshot wound to the head. You were right about everything. Ronan closed his eyes. He'd known. Had known since reading those journals, but confirmation still hit hard. Elias Vesper had been murdered, executed for caring too much, for trying to protect animals that most people saw as worthless obstacles, and now his killer was in custody, facing justice. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but it was something. You okay? Dr. Chen asked. They found Elias's body. The man who owned the ranch before you? Yeah, he's the reason I'm here, the reason any of this matters. Ronan looked at Ashfang. He died trying to protect this horse, trying to stop what was happening. I'm going to make sure that meant something. Dr. Chen squeezed his shoulder. I think you already have. Ronan stayed until visiting hours ended, then returned to the motel. Tomorrow, Celine would arrive. The day after, he'd probably have to give more statements, talk to prosecutors, start preparing for trial. But tonight, he just needed to sit in the quiet and let everything settle. He'd come to the desert to disappear. Instead, he'd found a reason to exist. A purpose that had nothing to do with his own pain and everything to do with finishing what someone else had started. Outside, the phoenix lights glittered against the night sky. Somewhere out there, Cade Holloway sat in a cell, his empire crumbling. Somewhere closer, Ashfang breathed steadily in his recovery stall, healing from wounds both old and new. And here, in a forgettable motel room, Ronan Mercer finally stopped running. The war wasn't over. The trial would be brutal. The testimony would be hard. The healing, for him, for the horse, for the land itself, would take years. But for the first time since the accident, Ronan felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt ready. Celine arrived the next morning driving a rental sedan and carrying enough legal documents to start her own library. She took one look at Ronan's bruised face and pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected. You look like hell, she said when she finally let go. You should see the other guys. I did. Federal custody photos, they look worse. She studied him with the critical eye of someone who'd spent years reading people for a living. How much pain are you in? Manageable. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Ronan gestured toward the motel's excuse for a lobby. There's coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot. They sat in cracked vinyl chairs, while Celine spread files across a wobbly table. She'd always been organized, even as a kid. While Ronan had been the one jumping off roofs and stealing their dad's motorcycle, Celine had been making color-coded study schedules and planning her future in neat columns. Looking at her now, tailored suit, hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose, he could see how far she'd come, how far they'd both come from the messy childhood they'd shared, in completely opposite directions. Okay, Celine said, clicking her pen. Let's start with the basics. The U.S. Attorney's Office is charging Cade Holloway and 7 co-defendants with conspiracy, violations of the wild free-roaming horses, and Burroughs Act, fraud, wire fraud, assault with a deadly weapon, and attempted murder. They're also pursuing murder charges in connection with Elias Vesper's death, but that's going to be harder to prove. Why? They found his body, he was shot. Finding a body isn't the same as proving who pulled the trigger. The autopsy confirms he died from a gunshot wound approximately 8 months ago, but they haven't recovered the weapon and there are no witnesses. She flipped through pages. What they do have are the communications you found, emails between Holloway and the former sheriff discussing handling the Vesper problem, text messages referencing permanent solutions, financial transfers made the day before Elias disappeared. That's not enough. It's circumstantial, good circumstantial evidence, but a defense attorney will argue it could mean anything. Handling a problem could mean legal action, buying him out, pressuring him to leave. Celine looked up. I'm not saying they won't get a conviction. I'm saying it won't be easy. Ronan's jaw tightened. What about the other charges? Those are solid. The assault on you alone, you had a gun to your head in front of multiple witnesses, including federal agents. The wildlife violations are documented in Elias's records and corroborated by the equipment they seized during your arrest. The fraud charges are based on falsified documents Holloway used to claim federal land. She tapped her pen against the table. They're going away for a long time, Ronan. Question is, how long? I want life. I want them to rot. I know, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that justice doesn't always look like revenge. She softened slightly. The best we can do is make sure they face consequences, real ones. And that starts with your testimony. Over the next week, Ronan learned what it meant to be a key witness in a federal case. Depositions with assistant U.S. attorneys who asked the same questions 17 different ways. Meetings with victim advocates who wanted to make sure he was emotionally prepared for trial. Sessions with Celine, who drilled him on how to answer questions without giving the defense ammunition. They're going to try to discredit you, she warned during one particularly brutal prep session. You're a drifter with no permanent address, no job, a history of disappearing for years at a time. They'll paint you as unstable, unreliable, possibly delusional. I'm not delusional. I know that, but a jury doesn't know you. All they'll see is what the defense shows them. Celine consulted her notes. They'll bring up the accidents, Jessica's death, your sister, me, losing contact with you for 2 years. They'll suggest you have a pattern of poor judgment and questionable mental stability. So what do I do? Tell the truth? Don't get defensive, don't get emotional. Just stick to the facts. She met his eyes. And Ronan? When they ask about Jessica, don't apologize. Don't make excuses. Just acknowledge what happened and move on. The moment you start explaining, you look guilty. I am guilty. You were in an accident. That's not the same thing as being guilty. She's dead because of me. Celine set down her pen. She's dead because a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed into your lane. The police report was clear. You weren't speeding, weren't impaired, weren't doing anything wrong. It was an accident. I was driving, and she chose to get on that motorcycle with you. She was an adult who made her own decisions. Celine's voice went firm. You don't get to take all the blame for something that wasn't entirely your fault, and you definitely don't get to let Holloway's lawyers use your grief as a weapon against you. Ronan looked away. 2 years of therapy condensed into one uncomfortable conversation with his sister. He didn't know whether to thank her or walk out. He stayed. Between prep sessions, he visited Ashfang. The horse was recovering faster than anyone expected, already standing for hours at a time, eating normally, showing flashes of the stubborn fire that had kept him alive this long. Dr. Chen said it was remarkable. Ronan thought it was just Ashfang being Ashfang, too angry at the world to die quietly. "He trusts you," Dr. Chen observed one afternoon as Ronan sat outside the stall. "That's unusual for a wild horse with his history." "I don't think he trusts me. I think he tolerates me." "Same thing for an animal like this." She checked the monitoring equipment. "I've been thinking about what happens when we release him. He can't go back to completely wild living. He's too recognizable now, and there are still people who'd want to hurt him out of spite, but he also won't do well in captivity. So what's the solution? Supervised freedom. A large property where he can roam, but still has protection and medical care if needed." She looked at Ronan pointedly. "You own 40 acres, don't you?" 40 acres of scrubland with a barely standing house. But it's his home, where Elias was, where he chose to stay even after Elias disappeared. Dr. Chen pulled up photos on her tablet, images of wild horse sanctuaries, protected ranges, rehabilitation facilities. What if you turned it into something permanent? A place specifically designed for horses like him, ones that have been traumatized, that can't be returned to the wild, but shouldn't be locked in stalls either. Ronan stared at the photos. "I don't have money for something like that. There are grants, federal programs for wildlife rehabilitation on private land. Plus, once this case goes to trial and people hear the story," she shrugged, "public attention has a way of opening wallets." The idea planted itself in Ronan's mind and refused to leave. A sanctuary, not just for Ashfang, but for other horses that had survived what he'd survived. A place where broken things could heal without being forced to pretend they weren't broken. Elias would have liked that. The preliminary hearing happened on a Tuesday. In a federal courthouse in Phoenix, Ronan sat in the gallery with Celine, watching as Cade Holloway and his co-defendants were arraigned. They'd all pleaded not guilty, naturally. Their lawyers, expensive suits, and practiced confidence argued for bail. The prosecutor, a woman named Rebecca Suarez with a reputation for never losing, argued against it. "These defendants pose a significant flight risk," she told the judge. "Mr. Holloway alone has offshore accounts in 3 countries and a private plane at his disposal. The evidence shows a pattern of violence, intimidation, and willingness to commit murder to protect their interests. Releasing them would endanger witnesses and compromise the integrity of this investigation." Kate's lawyer, a silver-haired man who probably charged more per hour than Ronan had earned in the past 2 years, countered smoothly. "My client is a respected businessman with deep ties to this community. He's never been convicted of a crime. The allegations against him are based largely on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a single witness whose credibility is, shall we say, questionable." Ronan felt Celine's hand on his arm, a silent reminder not to react. The judge, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd heard every excuse imaginable, wasn't buying it. "Bail is denied. Trial date is set for 60 days from today. Both parties will have discovery materials exchanged within 2 weeks. Gavel down. Done." As they filed out, Cade caught Ronan's eye across the courtroom. Even in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, he managed to look threatening. His mouth moved, forming words Ronan could read even without sound. "You're dead." Celine saw it too. "Ignore him. He's just trying to scare you." "It's working." "Then don't let him see it." The discovery process was brutal. Ronan had to review hundreds of pages of evidence, financial records, emails, text messages, photographs of dead horses. Elias's journals, now entered as evidence, came back to him redacted in places for the investigation. He read them again anyway, looking for details he might have missed. He found plenty. Elias had been more thorough than anyone realized. He documented Not just Holloway's operation, but an entire network of corruption spanning 3 counties, judges who'd dismissed complaints, environmental inspectors who'd looked the other way, county commissioners who'd fast-tracked development permits in exchange for campaign contributions. The federal investigation had started with dead horses and ended up uncovering a conspiracy that touched dozens of officials. "This is going to be huge," Celine said, when Ronan showed her some of the new discoveries. Like, national news huge. "I don't want it to be huge, I just want them in prison. You might get both." She was reading through a financial document, frowning. Holloway's company was moving $2 million a month through shell corporations. That's not just wildlife crimes. That's money laundering, tax evasion, possibly racketeering. Does that help the case? It means the feds are going to throw everything they have at this. The US Attorney's Office doesn't like being embarrassed, and this kind of corruption happening under their noses. They're going to want convictions on every single charge. 3 weeks before trial, Dr. Chen called with news. Ashfang's ready to be released. Medically, there's no reason to keep him here. She paused. "But I need to know he's going somewhere safe." "The ranch," Ronan said immediately. "I'll take him back to the ranch." "Have you been back there since the night of the arrest?" He hadn't. The place was technically released from being a crime scene, but Ronan had been too focused on the trial to think about returning. Now, hearing that Ashfang needed a home, he realized he'd been avoiding it. Going back meant confronting what had happened there, the violence, the fear, the moment he thought was his last. "I'll go back," he said. "Get it ready for him." Celine drove him out the next day. The ranch looked worse than Ronan remembered. Broken windows still boarded up, porch still sagging, muddy tire tracks from the federal vehicles scarring the ground. But someone had cleaned up the worst of the damage. The trash was gone, the broken fence post had been stacked neatly, and there was a note taped to the door. Ronan unfolded it. "Agent Reeves's handwriting. Thought you might need a head start. Some volunteers from the wildlife office helped clean up. There's also a gift in the barn. You've earned it. DR." The barn door was new. Actually new, not salvaged or patched. Inside, Ronan found supplies, feed, medical equipment, tools for repairs, and in the corner, a generator that actually looked like it might work. "Federal agents did this?" Selina asked, looking around. "Apparently." "Huh. Maybe there are some good people left in government after all." She nudged a bag of feed with her foot. "So, you really doing this? Turning this place into a sanctuary? Thinking about it?" "That's not an answer." Ronan walked to the barn door and looked out at the desert. 40 acres of nothing much. But it was his nothing much. His and Ashfang's and Elias's memory. "Yeah," he said finally, "I'm really doing this." They spent 2 days making the place habitable, fixed the worst of the roof leaks, reinforced the corral fence, set up the feeding area according to Dr. Chen's specifications. Celine proved surprisingly handy with a hammer, something Ronan hadn't known about her. "Shop class in high school," she explained when he commented. "You were too busy skipping school to notice I was actually learning things." "I learned things. How to hotwire a car doesn't count as practical education." They worked until their hands blistered and their backs ached. And somewhere in those 2 days, they stopped being estranged siblings and became something like friends again. Not perfect, still carrying damage from years of distance and different choices, but working on it. Dr. Chen delivered Ashfang herself, driving the mobile vet unit out to the ranch with the horse loaded in back. He came down the ramp slowly, favoring the leg that had been injured, but his eyes were bright and aware, taking in his surroundings, recognizing them. When he saw the corral, he walked straight to it and stood there like he was reclaiming territory. "He remembers," Dr. Chen said softly. "Of course he does." Ronan approached slowly, Hey, Ashwang, welcome home. The horse turned his head, regarding Ronan with that now familiar intensity. Then he did something he'd never done before. He walked over and lowered his head, letting Ronan touch his face. Just for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge the connection between them. Then he pulled away and went back to inspecting his territory. That's huge, Dr. Chen said. I've never seen him do that with anyone. Ronan's throat was tight. He knows I kept my promise, got him home safe. Dr. Chen stayed long enough to go over medical protocols, what to watch for, when to call her if something seemed wrong. Then she handed Ronan a folder. Information about federal grant programs for wildlife sanctuaries, applications, requirements, deadlines. It's a lot of paperwork, but she smiled. I think you can handle it. After she left, Ronan and Celine stood watching Ashfang explore his space. The horse moved carefully but confidently, testing boundaries, checking corners, making sure everything was as it should be. You think he's happy? Celine asked. I think he's home. That's probably close enough. The trial started on a Monday morning in late September. The courthouse was packed, media, environmental activists, local residents, federal agents. Rebecca Suarez had warned Ronan there would be attention, but he hadn't quite believed it until he saw the cameras. Stay focused, Celine whispered as they pushed through the crowd. Don't talk to reporters, don't make eye contact, just get inside. The courtroom itself was smaller than it looked on TV. Wood paneling, uncomfortable benches, a judge's bench that seemed designed to intimidate. Ronan took his seat in the witness area, trying not to look at the defense table where Cade and his co-defendants sat in suits that probably cost more than the ranch. Judge Patricia Morales entered and everyone stood. She was the same judge from the bail hearing, and she wasted no time getting started. This court is now in session, United States versus Cade Holloway and others. Is the government ready to proceed? We are, Your Honor. Rebecca Suarez stood, every inch the prosecutor who'd built a career on winning impossible cases. Is the defense ready? Cade's lawyer, Marcus Webb, according to the nameplate, rose smoothly. Ready, Your Honor. Then let's begin with opening statements. Suarez went first. She painted a picture of systematic corruption, greed masquerading as development, and violence committed against animals and humans alike. She talked about Elias Vesper, a man who died trying to protect federal land, about wild horses slaughtered illegally, about evidence buried and witnesses intimidated. The evidence will show, she concluded, that these defendants operated a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business. They bribed officials, falsified documents, and when one man threatened to expose them, they murdered him. This is not a case about business disputes or regulatory disagreements. This is a case about greed, corruption, and murder. Webb's opening was predictably different. He portrayed Cade as a visionary developer trying to bring economic prosperity to a dying region. The wild horses were necessary removals approved by corrupt county officials. His client had been lied to about the legality. Elias's death was tragic but unproven. And Ronan, the prosecution's star witness, is a drifter with no permanent address, no job, and a history of mental instability following a traumatic accident. He bought a worthless property for $10 and somehow convinced himself he'd uncovered a vast conspiracy. The evidence will show that Mr. Mercer is at best an unreliable narrator and at worst someone with his own agenda. Ronan felt every eye in the courtroom on him, kept his face neutral the way Celine had taught him. The first witness was Agent Reeves. She testified about the investigation, the evidence collected, the night of Cade's arrest. Cool, professional, unshakable, under cross-examination. Then came forensic accountants who traced the money, veterinarians who'd examined the dead horses, federal land managers who testified about the protected status of the basin, each piece of evidence stacked on top of the last, building a picture of deliberate, systematic criminality. On the third day, they called Ronan. He walked to the stand on a leg that hadn't stopped aching since the beating, swore on a Bible he wasn't sure he believed in anymore, sat down facing a courtroom full of people waiting to judge him. Suarez started gentle, basic questions: how he'd come to own the ranch, what he'd found there, the journals, the buried evidence, the black stallion that had stayed behind. "Can you describe the horse for the jury?" she asked. "Big, black, covered in scars, from ropes, bullets, beatings. He was..." Ronan searched for words. "He was like the land itself, damaged but refusing to quit." "And you felt a connection to that?" Webb started to object, but the judge waved him off. "Yeah," Ronan said. "I understood what it was like to keep going when everything said you should quit." Suarez walked him through finding the evidence, contacting the federal agents, Kate's threats, then the night of the storm. "Mr. Holloway put a gun to your head?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "He said I was going to disappear, just like Elias." "Did you believe him?" "Yes." "He'd already killed once, why not twice?" Webb objected. "Speculation." Sustained. "The jury will disregard the witness's opinion about Mr. Holloway's prior actions." "But the damage was done. The jury had heard it." Suarez continued. "What happened next?" "Federal agents arrived, arrested everyone, saved my life and probably Ashfang's too." "Ashfang being the horse?" "Yes." No further questions. Webb stood for cross-examination and Ronan braced himself. "Mr. Mercer, you've had a difficult few years, haven't you?" "You could say that." "A motorcycle accident. Your passenger, Jessica Hartwell, died?" Celine had prepared him for this. "Don't get emotional. Just facts." "Yes." "And after that, you essentially disappeared for 2 years. Your own sister didn't know where you were, whether you were alive or dead. Isn't that correct?" "I needed time." "Time to grieve? Or time to avoid responsibility?" "Objection," Suarez said. "Argumentative." Sustained. Webb didn't miss a beat. "You have no permanent address, no job, no assets beyond a 40-acre ranch you bought for $10. Would you say you're financially stable?" "No." "Mentally stable?" "I'm not crazy if that's what you're asking. I'm asking if someone who disappears for 2 years, refuses contact with family, and ends up living in a condemned building might have some mental health challenges that affect their perception of reality." Ronan's hands tightened on the chair. "My perception of reality is fine. Your client threatened to kill me. He tried to steal a protected wild horse. He's the one with problems." "Your Honor?" Webb started. "Answer the questions as asked, Mr. Mercer," Judge Morales warned. Webb smiled thinly. "Let's talk about this supposed evidence you found. You claim Elias Vesper buried it?" "I don't claim. He did. His letter said exactly where." "A letter you say you found, but no one can verify that, can they? For all we know, you created this evidence yourself." "That's insane. The financial records, the photographs could have been fabricated by someone with time, motivation, and a grudge against a successful businessman. I didn't even know Kate Holloway existed until after I found the evidence." Webb consulted his notes. "You're passionate about this case. Some might say obsessed. Is it possible you've convinced yourself of a conspiracy because it gives your life meaning? It was lacking." The courtroom was silent. Ronan felt his pulse hammering. "No," he said quietly. "I know what I saw. I know what happened. And Elias Vesper's body with a bullet in his skull proves I'm right. Or proves that an old man was shot by someone we may never identify, and you've constructed an elaborate narrative around his death. Webb turned to the jury. The prosecution wants you to believe my client is a murderer based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of an unreliable witness. I ask you to consider whether Mr. Mercer's version of events is the truth or simply what he wants to believe. The cross-examination continued for another hour. Webb picked at every detail, questioned every conclusion, tried to make Ronan look unstable, unreliable, motivated by something other than truth. But Ronan held firm. He didn't lose his temper, didn't get defensive, just stated facts and let them speak for themselves. When it was finally over and he stepped down, Celine gave him a slight nod. You did okay. The trial lasted 3 weeks, witness after witness, evidence piling up. A former Holloway employee testified about being ordered to falsify environmental impact reports. The medical examiner confirmed Elias had been shot execution style. A forensic analyst matched the financial records to payments made the day before Elias disappeared. Then came the bombshell. A man named Thomas Garrett, former head of security for Holloway Enterprises, took the stand looking like he'd aged 20 years in 8 months. I was there, he said quietly, the night Elias Vesper died. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morales called for order, but the damage was done. Garrett testified that Kate had ordered him to scare Elias into silence. But when Elias refused to back down, refused to destroy his evidence, refused to stop fighting, Kate said we couldn't let him talk to the feds, that everything we'd built would collapse. Garrett's voice shook. He told me to make it permanent. And did you? Suarez asked. I drove Elias to the North Canyon, told him we were going to show him something that would change his mind. Then He couldn't finish. You shot him? Yes. On Mr. Holloway's orders? Yes. Webb tried to tear the testimony apart, suggesting Garrett was lying to get a reduced sentence, but the evidence backed him up. Phone records showing calls between Cade and Garrett that night, financial transfers made to Garrett's account the next day, text messages discussing cleanup. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the verdict was clear on every count, guilty. Cade Holloway showed no emotion as the judge read the verdict. His co-defendants weren't as controlled. One woman started crying, another man looked ready to bolt. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Cade got 45 years. Thomas Garrett, who'd cooperated, got 25. The others got sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years depending on their involvement. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Ronan ignored them all except one. Do you feel justice was served? A young woman asked, microphone extended. Ronan thought about Elias, dead in a canyon, about the horses slaughtered and left to rot, about Ashfang's scars and his own broken leg and the ranch that had nearly become another crime scene. Justice was served, he said, but it doesn't bring anyone back. It just makes sure this stops. That's going to have to be enough. Celine guided him through the crowd to her car. They drove in silence back toward the ranch, watching the desert landscape roll past. You did good, she said finally. We did good. I couldn't have done this without you. I know, she smiled slightly, but you would have tried anyway. That's what makes you either very brave or very stupid. Can't it be both? With you, usually is. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting. Ashfang was waiting in the corral, silhouetted against the dying light. He raised his head as they approached, ears forward, alert, but not alarmed. You think he knows? Celine asked. Knows what? That you won. That the people who hurt him are going to prison. Ronan watched the stallion for a long moment. I think he knows he's safe. That's probably all that matters to him. Celine stayed for dinner. Canned soup heated on the working generator, bread from the store in Caldera Springs. Not fancy, but better than Ronan had eaten in months. "So what now?" she asked. "You really going through with the sanctuary idea? Already started the grant applications? Dr. Chen's helping? You know, it's going to be a lot of work, right? Money, permits, constant maintenance. I know. And you're going to do it anyway." "Yeah." Celine shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're going to need help. Legal help, at minimum. Setting up a non-profit, dealing with federal regulations, all that bureaucratic nightmare stuff." "You offering?" "I'm saying I know a good lawyer who might be willing to work pro bono for a cause she believes in." She met his eyes. If her brother is willing to let her help. Ronan felt something loosen in his chest. "I'd like that." "Good, because you're stuck with me now." She stood, gathering her things. "I need to get back to Phoenix tonight, but I'll be back next week with the paperwork we'll need. Try not to get into any more life-threatening situations before then. No promises?" She hugged him at the door, fierce and quick. "I'm proud of you, Ronan. I know I haven't said that, but I am." After she left, Ronan walked out to the corral. Ashfang was still there, a dark shape against the stars. "We did it," Ronan said quietly. "Elias can rest now. And you're safe, really safe." The horse turned his head, watching Ronan with eyes that reflected starlight. And for the first time since the accident, since Jessica's death, since 2 years of running and hiding and trying to disappear, Ronan felt something he barely recognized. Peace. Not the absence of pain, the pain was still there, probably always would be, but the crushing weight of guilt, the constant voice saying he didn't deserve to exist, the belief that everything he touched turned to destruction, that was finally, slowly, starting to lift. He'd saved something, protected something, finished what Elias had started. Maybe that didn't erase his failures, but it was a start. The first real snow came in November, which shouldn't have been possible in the Arizona desert, but happened anyway. Just a dusting that melted by noon, but enough to make Ashfang snort and paw at the white stuff like it had personally offended him. Ronan watched from the newly rebuilt porch, actual lumber this time, not salvaged scraps, and felt something close to contentment. The ranch didn't look like much yet, the house still needed work, the barn was functional but ugly, and the corral fence had been patched so many times it resembled a quilt more than a barrier. But it was standing, it was safe, and it was home. The federal grant had come through 3 weeks after the trial ended. Not a fortune, but enough to make necessary repairs and start building proper facilities. Celine had handled the paperwork, mountains of it, while Ronan did the physical work of transforming 40 acres of scrubland into something that could actually support animals. He wasn't alone in the work, that was the surprising part. Dr. Chen came out twice a week to help design the medical facility. Agent Reeves, now retired from fieldwork, volunteered her weekends to help with construction. Even Earl from the diner showed up one Saturday with his truck full of donated supplies from people in Caldera Springs who'd followed the trial. "Figured you could use this," Earl had said, unloading bags of feed and building materials. "Whole town's been talking about what you did. Some of them finally grew a conscience. Or they just don't want to look bad on the news," Ronan had replied. "Does it matter? Help is help." It mattered to Ronan, but he'd accepted it anyway. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. The first horse arrived in December, a mare named Cinder, rescued from a kill pen in Nevada. She was emaciated, covered in sores, blind in one eye from an old injury that had never been treated. The rescue organization that saved her had nowhere to put her. Too damaged for adoption, too expensive to rehabilitate. "Can you take her?" the woman on the phone had asked. "I know you're just getting started, but we're out of options. It's either your sanctuary or we put her down." Ronan had looked at his still unfinished facilities, his dwindling bank account, his complete lack of experience running anything resembling a rescue operation. "Yeah," he'd said, "bring her." Cinder arrived on a cold Tuesday morning, so thin her ribs looked like they might break through her skin. She came down the trailer ramp shaking, ears pinned flat, ready to fight or flee, depending on what happened next. Ashfang had watched from his usual spot near the corral. When Cinder was led past him toward the quarantine area Dr. Chen had helped build, the black stallion did something unexpected. He walked over to the fence and stood there. Just stood, not threatening, not retreating, a silent acknowledgement of another survivor. Cinder's good eye found him, and something in her posture shifted. Still wary, still scared, but maybe fractionally less alone. "They recognize each other," Dr. Chen said quietly, "not individually, but what they represent. Shared trauma. Is that good or bad?" "Depends. Sometimes shared trauma creates connection, sometimes it just reinforces fear." She watched the two horses. "We'll see which one this is." It took 3 weeks before Cinder would let anyone touch her without flinching. Another month before she'd eat while humans were nearby. But slowly, painfully, she started to heal. The sores closed, weight returned to her frame. The wariness in her eye didn't disappear, but it softened slightly. And Ashfang, who'd spent months tolerating only Ronan's presence and started spending time near Cinder's enclosure, not interacting directly, he was still too wild for that, but present. Like he was standing guard. The second horse came in January, then 2 more in February. By March, Ronan had 7 horses in various stages of recovery, and the sanctuary that had been a vague idea was becoming undeniably real. It was also becoming undeniably expensive. "We need more funding," Celine said during one of her weekly visits. She'd taken to driving out every Saturday, ostensibly to help with legal paperwork, but really just to check on her brother. The federal grant covered startup costs, but ongoing operations are killing your budget. "I know. Have you considered fundraising, public donations?" Ronan made a face. "I'm not good at asking for money." "You don't have to ask. Tell the story. Let people decide if they want to help." She pulled up something on her laptop. "The trial got national coverage. People care about this, about what you're doing. They care about a dramatic story. That's not the same as caring about actual horses." "Maybe, but dramatic stories get people's attention, and attention gets donations." She turned the screen toward him. "I put together a basic website, nothing fancy, just information about the sanctuary, photos of the horses, a donation button. We could launch it, see what happens." Ronan looked at the screen. Photos of Ashfang, of Cinder, of the other rescues. Text explaining the mission, providing sanctuary for wild and abused horses that had nowhere else to go. A brief mention of Elias Vesper and the investigation that had started it all. "It feels like exploitation," he said. "It's documentation. There's a difference." Celine's voice softened. "These horses deserve to have their stories told, and you deserve to not go bankrupt trying to save them." So they launched a website. Ronan expected nothing and prepared for disappointment. The first donation came within an hour. $50 from someone in Montana, then $100 from California. By the end of the day, they'd raised almost $2,000. By the end of the week, $15,000. "People want to help," Selena said, watching the numbers climb. "You just have to let them." The money meant better facilities, a proper medical barn, heated shelters for winter, quality feed instead of whatever was cheapest. It meant Ronan could afford to hire help, a part-time veterinary assistant, a college student studying equine science who needed internship hours. It meant the sanctuary could actually function instead of just barely surviving. But money wasn't the only thing that arrived. In April, a veteran named Marcus Chen showed up unannounced, driving a truck with Wyoming plates and towing a horse trailer. He was maybe 40, built like someone who'd spent years in the military, with eyes that had seen things he didn't talk about. "I heard about this place," he said without preamble. "Read about it online. I've got a horse that needs somewhere to go." Ronan walked over to the trailer. Inside was a bay gelding, scarred and nervous, pacing in the confined space. "His name's Sergeant," Marcus said. "He was my daughter's horse. She died 2 years ago. Car accident. I've been keeping him since then, but I can't..." His voice broke. "I can't take care of him anymore. Looking at him every day just reminds me of what I lost." Ronan understood that more than he wanted to admit. "We're at capacity right now. I don't know if, Please." Marcus's hands were shaking. "I can't sell him, can't put him down, but I can't keep him either. This place, what you're doing, it feels right. Like he'd be with people who understand." Ronan looked at the horse, at the man, at the desperation that was so familiar it hurt. "Yeah," he said, "we'll take him." Marcus stayed to help unload Sergeant, then stood there watching the horse settle into a paddock, tears running down his face. "Thank you," he managed. "You don't know what this means." "I think I do." Marcus left, but he came back the next weekend, and the weekend after that. Started helping with chores, repairs, whatever needed doing. Never asked for anything in return. Never explained why he kept coming back. Ronan didn't ask. Some things didn't need explaining. By summer, the sanctuary had grown in ways Ronan hadn't anticipated. They had 12 horses now, each with their own story of trauma and survival, but they also had something else, a community. Volunteers showed up regularly. Some were local, drawn by the trial coverage and the chance to be part of something meaningful. Others drove hours from Phoenix or Tucson, treating it like a pilgrimage to a place where broken things were allowed to heal. There was Maria, a retired teacher who'd lost her husband and found purpose in grooming horses. Tyler, the same kid who'd driven Ronan to the ranch on that first day, who came every weekend to help with feeding and maintenance. A group of college students from the environmental science program who documented everything for their research projects. And there was Sarah, a 17-year-old girl, who showed up one day looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. "I need to volunteer," she'd said, not asking, demanding. "I need to do something useful." Ronan had learned to recognize that particular brand of desperation. "You run away from home? My parents know I'm here. They don't care. They barely notice I exist anymore." Her voice was flat, affect completely dead. "My brother died last year. Everything's been different since then, wrong. I'm not a therapist. I don't want therapy. I want to work." So Ronan put her to work, mucking stalls, filling water troughs, hauling feed, hard physical labor that left no energy for overthinking. Sarah came back every day after school, didn't talk much, didn't smile, just worked with a single-minded intensity that worried Ronan. But over weeks, then months, something shifted. She started talking to the horses, quiet conversations nobody else was meant to hear. Started staying later, helping with evening feeding. Started very slowly coming back to life. One evening, Ronan found her sitting in Cinder's stall, the mare's head resting against her shoulder, while Sarah cried. He started to back away, give her privacy, but she'd already seen him. "Sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. You don't have to explain." She's so damaged, but she's still here, still trying. Sarah's hand moved to Cinder's scarred neck. "If she can survive what happened to her, maybe I can survive this too." Ronan sat down outside the stall, his bad leg stretched out. "You know what I've learned about survival? It's not about being strong or brave or any of that. inspirational poster garbage. It's about showing up every day, even when you don't want to, even when it hurts, even when you can't see the point. Does it get easier? Sometimes. Sometimes it just gets different. He watched Cinder, calm in a way she hadn't been months ago. But different can be enough. Sarah came back the next day, and the day after that. 3 years later, she'd be applying to veterinary schools, crediting the sanctuary with saving her life. Ronan would never feel comfortable with that kind of credit. But he'd learned to accept that sometimes helping others helped yourself even when you weren't trying. The sanctuary's reputation grew. Articles were written. A documentary crew spent a week filming. Someone started a social media account that Ronan refused to manage but couldn't quite shut down because it brought in donations. And with the attention came more horses, more damaged animals with nowhere else to go. A Mustang gelding who'd been beaten so badly he couldn't stand human touch. A mare who'd survived a barn fire but had scars that covered half her body. 2 wild-caught yearlings slated for slaughter who needed somewhere to just be horses without demands or expectations. Ashfang remained the king of it all. Still wild, still refusing any attempts at traditional training, but no longer alone. He'd formed a small herd, Cinder and 2 other mares who seemed to understand his boundaries. They grazed together, moved together, existed together in a way that was more about companionship than dominance. One morning in late September, 2 years after Ronan had bought the ranch for $10, he watched Ashfang lead his small herd across the basin. The black stallion moved differently now, still powerful, still scarred, but with less of the frantic edge that had defined him, like he'd finally accepted that this place was safe, that the war was over. Dr. Chen came to stand beside Ronan, watching the same scene. "You know what the success rate is for wild horse rehabilitation?" she asked. "I'm guessing low." "Very low. Most wild horses captured after trauma never fully recover. They're too far gone, too damaged." She nodded toward Ashfang. "But look at him. He's not tame, never will be. But he's healthy, has a family, chose to stay here even though he could leave any time. He's smarter than I am. I didn't choose to stay, I just didn't have anywhere else to go." "And now?" Ronan thought about that. The sanctuary employed 3 people full-time now, had dozens of regular volunteers, housed 16 horses with more on the waiting list. His sister visited every week. His legs still hurt, but he'd stopped seeing it as a punishment. The nightmares about the accident came less frequently. "Now I think I'd stay, even if I had somewhere else to go," he said. Celine's car appeared on the road, right on schedule. Saturday morning, like clockwork. She'd brought someone with her. This time, Ronan could see a passenger. They pulled up to the house, and Celine emerged with a woman Ronan didn't recognize. Professional clothes, government ID badge visible on her belt. "Ronan, this is Director Catherine Walsh from the Department of Interior," Celine introduced. She wanted to see the sanctuary. Director Walsh extended her hand. "Mr. Mercer, I've been following your work. Impressive what you've built here. It's not just me. I've had a lot of help. That's what I'm here to discuss." Walsh pulled out a tablet. "The federal government is launching a new initiative partnering with private sanctuaries to house wild horses removed from overpopulated ranges. We need facilities that can handle traumatized animals, provide long-term care, and demonstrate successful rehabilitation." Ronan felt Celine's hand on his arm, a warning to listen before reacting. "Your sanctuary fits all those criteria," Walsh continued. "We'd like to contract with you, provide funding, resources, oversight. In exchange, you take horses from federal roundups that are too old, too injured, or too traumatized for adoption." "The horses nobody wants," Ronan said. "The horses that deserve a chance anyway." Walsh met his eyes. I read the trial transcripts. I know what Elias Vesper was fighting for. This program is partly a response to that case, a recognition that we need to do better. I can't think of a better place to start than here. Ronan looked at the basin where Ashfang's herd was grazing, at the barn they'd built from donations and volunteer labor, at the paddocks holding horses that had survived what should have killed them. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, take your time. Walsh handed him a folder. All the details are here. My direct number is on the card. Call me when you're ready to talk. After she left, Celine sat on the porch steps next to Ronan. You're going to say yes, she said. You don't know that. I know you. This is everything Elias wanted, everything you've been building toward. It's also a huge commitment, federal oversight, regulations, accountability. What if I screw it up? Then you fix it and try again. That's what you've been doing all along. She bumped his shoulder with hers. You bought a ranch for $10 and turned it into something that matters. You testified against murderers. You built a sanctuary from nothing. You really think dealing with federal bureaucracy is going to be the thing that stops you? It might be, but it won't be. She stood, brushing dust off her pants. I have to get back to Phoenix, but Ronan, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you, in case I haven't said that enough. You've said it. Well, I'm saying it again. Ronan spent the next week reading through Walsh's proposal, running numbers with his accountant. He had an accountant now, which still felt surreal, and talking to his team. Everyone agreed it was a good opportunity, a chance to expand, to help more horses, to build something sustainable. He called Walsh on a Friday morning. I have conditions, he said. I'm listening. The horses that come here stay here. No transfers unless absolutely necessary for medical reasons. No euthanasia without a second opinion from an independent vet. And I maintain final say over the facility's operations. You can inspect, audit, whatever you need, but this stays my sanctuary. A pause. Then, those are reasonable conditions. I'll have contracts drawn up. One more thing, any money left over after operating costs goes into an endowment, so this place exists long after I'm gone. Planning ahead, planning for reality. I'm not going to live forever, and these horses deserve security beyond my lifespan. Agreed. I'll add it to the contract. They signed the papers. 6 weeks later, federal funding started flowing. The sanctuary expanded, new barns, better medical facilities, additional paddocks. They hired more staff, brought in specialists, started educational programs for school groups and aspiring rehabilitators. Within a year, they were housing 30 horses. Within 2 years, 50. The work was endless, exhausting. Some days Ronan wanted to quit, to walk away from the constant demands and responsibility. Some days his leg hurt so badly he could barely stand, and the weight of all those damaged animals depending on him felt like too much. But he didn't quit, because on those same hard days, he'd watch Ashfang running across the basin with his herd, or he'd see Sarah teaching a younger volunteer how to approach a traumatized horse, or he'd receive a letter from someone who'd visited and been inspired to start their own rescue, and he'd remember why it mattered. 5 years after buying the ranch, Ronan stood on the ridge overlooking the sanctuary. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Below, horses grazed in groups, some wild-born, some domestic, all carrying scars they'd never fully lose. Ashfang was there, older now, a few grey hairs starting to show around his muzzle. He'd brought a new mare into his herd, a wild Mustang who'd arrived terrified and violent, but had somehow found safety in the black stallion's presence. Marcus was working in the barn, his weekend ritual now routine. Sarah was in veterinary school, but came back every break to help. Celine had taken a position with a nonprofit that fought for animal welfare legislation, crediting her brother with showing her what really mattered. The sanctuary employed 12 people, had over 100 regular volunteers, and housed 63 horses. They turned away dozens more, not because they didn't want to help, but because there were limits to what they could manage without compromising care. It wasn't perfect, it would never be perfect. Horses still died despite their best efforts, funding was always tight, bureaucracy was a constant headache, and Ronan's leg would ache until the day he died, a permanent reminder of the accident that had started this whole journey. But it was good, real, something that mattered beyond just his own survival. His phone rang. Unknown number. Ronan Mercer? Yeah. This is Tom Keating from the Tribune. I'm doing a piece on wild horse sanctuaries, heard about your place. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Ronan almost said no. He'd done enough interviews to last a lifetime. But then he thought about Elias, whose story had almost been lost. About the horses who'd been slaughtered in silence because nobody was paying attention. About all the Sarahs and Marcuses who needed to know that broken things could heal. Yeah, he said. I can talk. Great. First question, what made you decide to start a sanctuary? Ronan looked at the desert, at the horses, at the life he'd accidentally built from $10 and desperation. I bought a ranch I couldn't afford and found a horse nobody wanted, he said. Turned out we both needed somewhere to stop running. That's good. Can you expand on that? So he did. He talked about Elias and the journals, about the corruption that had seemed too big to fight, about nearly dying and deciding that counted for something, about learning that healing wasn't linear, wasn't complete, but was possible anyway. The journalist asked about the trial, about Ashfang, about what came next for the sanctuary. We keep going, Ronan said. Keep taking horses nobody else wants. Keep proving that damage doesn't mean disposable. Is there anything you want people to know? About the sanctuary, the horses, any of it? Ronan thought about that. About Jessica, who he'd never stopped missing, but had finally forgiven himself for losing. About his 2 years of running that had somehow led him exactly where he needed to be. About Ashfang, who'd taught him that survival was enough even when it didn't feel like victory. I'd want them to know that you don't have to be fixed to be valuable, he said finally. That showing up broken is sometimes braver than showing up whole. And that the things worth saving are usually the ones everyone else has given up on. He hung up and sat there as the sun finished setting. Behind him he heard hoofbeats, Ashfang, approaching closer than he usually did. The stallion stopped maybe 10 feet away, close enough for Ronan to see every scar, every mark of what he'd survived. They'd never had the relationship people expected. Ronan had never ridden Ashfang, never put a halter on him, never asked him to be anything other than what he was. Wild, scarred, free to leave but choosing to stay. Maybe that was the best kind of relationship anyway. The kind built on mutual respect rather than ownership, on understanding rather than control. We did okay, Ronan said to the horse. Didn't we? Ashfang's ear swiveled toward him, listening the way he always did. Then the stallion turned and walked back toward his herd, his family, the life he'd built from the wreckage of everything he'd lost. And Ronan watched him go, finally understanding what Elias had known all along, that some things were worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible, that broken things could build something beautiful together, that choosing to stay when you could run was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. He'd come to the desert to disappear. Instead, he'd learned how to exist, not perfectly, not without pain, but fully, honestly, in a way that mattered. The stars were coming out now, brilliant against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the barn, horses were settling for the night. Somewhere in Caldera Springs, Earl was probably closing up the diner. Somewhere in Phoenix, Celine was working on legislation that might prevent another Elias from dying alone. And here, on 40 acres that had cost $10 and nearly everything else, Ronan Mercer stood watching a black stallion disappear into the dusk, finally at peace with the life he'd found when he stopped looking for an ending. The sanctuary would continue long after him. He'd made sure of that. The horses would be cared for. Elias's legacy would live on, and maybe decades from now, someone else would stand on this ridge and wonder about the man who turned a ghost ranch into a place where forgotten things found home. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything